Hello everybody. Today I'm doing a book review, in fact a trilogy of books by Haruki Murakami. This book is called 1Q84. It's not yet available in English. This is the Dutch edition. The first two books will be out in September in one lovely big volume from Knopf books. I say lovely because the cover is really interesting, the Knopf edition with several layers that are transparent, which suit very well the themes of parallel worlds and synchronicity that are in this. You could say it's a kind of a literary fantasy novel. It's definitely literary, yet very readable and typical for Murakami. There is some whimsy, there are some special details, you could say. So here the third book already out in Dutch, which concludes the trilogy. I don't know when it will come out in America. It is true that the Murakami fans who will read the first two volumes, well, in English, let's say, it can be, if you like cleanly finished stories where every thread of the story is nicely rounded and finished, well, it may be a bit frustrating when you come to the end of these two books. So I will say a few more things about these books to give you my impressions, and I will do my best not to give any real spoiler, except for, you could say, some small things that you may read probably at the Amazon blurb or things like that. I go back first a bit in time, so I put these recent books aside, and in fact, just a bit of history. I discovered Murakami already some 20 years ago when I was on an airplane, and I read, I think it was Newsweek or Time magazine, probably Newsweek, and I was bored. It was a long flight, and I read a review about this book, Haruki Murakami, A Wild Sheep Chase, one of his earlier books, and he was far from as popular back then. He was at most a cult author in the West at that moment, and the reviews seemed very interesting, kind of a surreal kind of detective kind of story, but then again not really, written by a Japanese guy. However, the story was said to be very Western in atmosphere, so I was very curious about this. And this, well, really around 20 years ago, it was before the internet was everywhere, so you maybe remember you had to go to a bookshop, they had to look up the title, and after a month or two or so I had the book, and this was a real discovery, and from then on I was hooked, and I read in essence more or less all of them, and this is still one of my favorites. I think it's very playful, and well, I'm not telling too much about it, but I was immediately addicted. Also, the book he wrote afterwards, The Hard-Boiled Wonderland, is splendid as well. A few others, before we go back to the books at hand. Norwegian Wood. This is a special edition that I bought back then. It was English with a Japanese vocabulary at the end. In fact, I believe that this was done for Japanese people who wanted to read in English too, and that's how I think these lovely little Kodansha editions came about. Norwegian Wood has been filmed quite recently. It's kind of an emotional drama. It seemed to me that the movie is not so good as the book. Also interesting, I must say, for here, this one, the first one, and this edition at least of Norwegian Wood, they were translated by the fantastic Alfred Birnbaum, who I think has a fantastic command of language. And it is true that afterwards other people started translating Murakami, and the books were always competent, nothing wrong with that, but I always thought that the ones which are not translated by Birnbaum lacked some sparkle compared to the Birnbaum translations. So, well, yeah, that's life. Pinball, 1973, is one of the earlier books, also Kodansha edition. This was said to be, for a long time, his magnum opus, the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. Quite a good book, a bit long in places, fascinating in moments, with a bit surreal in the beginning, and then it turns into war horrors. A very remarkable and special book. Interesting is also that the beginning of the book is very similar to a fantastic short story that he had written. So that's a Wind-Up Girl chronicle, and now I think that 1Q84, being quite a bit bigger, as you can see, will now of course get the throne of being the magnum opus. What else? After the Quake, short stories inspired by the quake in Kobe back then. He also, I didn't take them all here, he also has another one where it was inspired by current events, a non-fiction book looking at interviewing even, and looking at the gas attacks in the metro. It's another one of his. And then one about his hobby is running. It's kind of a philosophical, but very readable book, what I think about when I think about running. It's another one of his non-fiction books, but this is fiction and very readable and very good. Kafka on the Shore. Very often I have recommended Kafka on the Shore as a very good first Murakami to read. It's extremely readable, and you've quite some meat in it. It's still quite a big story, fascinating. It has a lot of the typical characteristics of his style. It's a good first Murakami, remember this. Bon, so I go now back to the story at hand to give you an idea. This man has already written quite a few books, so I was very curious about this. So what is all this about? Well, again, I'm not trying not to tell too much, just a few things which I don't think will spoil your reading in any way. We follow two characters. I will first look at the first two books, because that's the ones that if you're reading it in English you will discover first. At a high level you could say it's kind of a boy and girl are looking for each other kind of story. But of course that would be a bit simple. Murakami made it much more complex and special, because indeed it is a story about parallel worlds, things that happen also in parallel, and it's not a genre book. It is not science fiction, while it steals definitely some of the elements that you have in science fiction and in fantasy. It's more the writing style is more literary. And think about there have been several movies also discussing, okay, what if in your life you decide at one point to do something else, or if you arrive somewhere just a few minutes later or earlier, how would your life look like? There have been movies like that, like maybe Think Sliding Doors is one of them. So that is a bit the background. Yes, there are parallel worlds which make it not 100% realistic, but if you want 100% realism, you never have to read Murakami. There is always something whimsical about it, but still always readable and interesting. By the way, so this is now called his magnum opus, and he is often mentioned that he could get the Nobel Prize one day. I don't know. I'm not certain if they will age tremendously well, his books. I find them very readable, but I'm not certain that if, let's say, within 50 years, people will look back at them in total awe. I'm not certain about that. So I'm not certain that he's the kind of writer that would make a Nobel Prize. Why? Honestly, I love him a lot. I don't think they are very deep, in meaning. So typically when you get a Nobel Prize, there is some deep meaning in books. And I see Murakami more as a very good entertainer who also has very good and interesting things to say. So, the Dutch edition, by the way, is pretty nice. So it's nicely bound in a day where now hardcovers are often also quite badly bound in my experience. Here you have a picture of the author. And since he is quite a private person from what I read, so he tends to be not recognized when he goes jogging and so on, which it seems he likes. He's also, when he came up, he was considered as a bit of the new wave in Japan. There are a few other writers, really, because they made such a different writing style than the more classical, not even so old Japanese writers. Think about Mishima, etc., Murakami, and a few others, like there's another Murakami, Ryu Murakami, and a few others are more Western-oriented, which makes their appeal pretty universal. So, okay, 1Q84, it's all about, the story takes place in 1984, but the parallel world is called 1Q84, the Q for question mark. That's where the title comes from. So, okay. And so a bit about the form of the book. Interesting, the first two books, you see Aomame and Tengo. Aomame and Tengo, these are the two protagonists for the, let's say, the boy and girl looking for each other. Indeed, that's the two protagonists, those two. And they both have a sad childhood, as is very clear from the story. They knew each other from childhood, and because of complex circumstances, they begin to think more and more about each other, while they have not seen each other since 20 years or so. And so you notice that the chapters perfectly alternate. You see, it begins with Aomame, then goes to Tengo, etc. So Aomame being a young woman with a strange name. She said it herself, it sounds a bit like edamame, which are those Japanese beans that you get as an appetizer. I'm not saying too much about her profession here, because that would spoil the reading a bit much. But Tengo, I can say that he is a teacher who is also a mathematics teacher, who has literary ambitions. And in fact, some of the storyline of Tengo is a bit philosophizing about what makes a book good and so on. And well, there are many writers, and not Murakami is not the first, who have put some of their own ideas in about about the writing process in their novels. And here I think Murakami does that a bit through the character of Tengo. At least the Dutch edition comes with a map. I'm not certain if this map will be, or maps I should rather say, are also in the American edition. I cannot say. Also for the Dutch edition, the translator put quite a few notes there. Of course, now I'm browsing and I don't see any, which can be handy if you're not totally up to date on Japanese history and so on. While the book is eminently readable, there may be a few references to literature and poems or history of Japan that many Western readers would not grasp unless you're very into Japan. And at least here this Dutch edition helps them a bit. So it helped me a few times. I knew some of the references, but not everything. So to give you an idea about the prose and the style, and I can extrapolate a bit on that, I'm now going, but please forgive imperfections, because it's improvised. I'm reading here the Dutch, and I will simultaneously try to translate to English. I should perhaps have written it down first, but okay, I will just give it a try now, but to give you an idea about what kind of story it is. And of course, I'm an amateur, and I will translate back to English from the Dutch translation of a Japanese book. So don't look too much on the style elements. Anyway, the radio in the taxi was tuned to an FM station that was broadcasting a classical concert. It was Janáček's Sinfonietta, not a piece that seems perfectly suited for a taxi that is stuck in a traffic jam. The driver, a middle-aged man, wasn't carefully listening at all. Like an experienced old fisherman on the bow of his ship, who's looking at the coming and going of the tides, which does not seem promising. In that same vein, he was looking with disdain and with tight lips at the long row of cars that were standing bumper to bumper in front of him. Aomame was sitting deep in the cushions of the backbench and was listening with closed eyes to the music. How many people would there be on the world who, when they hear the first part of Janáček's Sinfonietta, how many people would be able to say, "Hey, that's Janáček's Sinfonietta"? Probably the number is somewhere between very few and almost nobody. But for some reason or another, Aomame knew it. And so this is how it begins. And already I can tell you now, everything in the book is linked. Everything comes back. Janáček's Sinfonietta will come back a few times until the third book. And that happens all the time. In fact, there are small details. As soon as our mama notices that she's in a different world, a parallel world, there are slight differences, but even those differences come back. So everything is linked in a complex puzzle. And I already like here. I knew from the beginning with that quite obscure classical piece, I knew that I was going to like the book. What else? Here to give you an idea about Tango. This is Tango. It's a chapter here that begins. For many people, Sunday morning is a symbol for deliciously not doing anything. But in all the years of his childhood, Tango Tango wasn't looking forward to a Sunday morning, even once with pleasure. Sundays made him always depressed. By the weekend, he was moving slower. He lost his appetite and he felt pain everywhere, etc. So this refers, in fact, to the unhappy childhood that both of them have. And something that comes back in his childhood is a concept of a guy, a man who collects stacks for TV watching, and that comes back also everywhere in the book. I thought first, well, this is just a childhood memory, but it comes back several times. What else? Yes. So here about the different world that she is in. That's what our mommy now is in. Somebody had told her that if you do such a strange thing, then it can happen that the things around you will look a tiny bit different than before. But don't be deceived by this impression. There's always one reality. Now here, and then so she thinks back about that warning she had, and when she came in some way in a parallel world. And then here, to give you an idea about her thinking about this different world, our mommy was looking around her. She studied the palms of her hand and the form of her nails, and to be certain, she felt with both hands through her blues at her breasts. By the way, indeed, she has a complex that she doesn't like her breasts too much. But okay, there was no change. The form and the size were still the same. I'm still the same person as always, and the world is still the same world as always. But a change had begun, she knew. It was just as to see, to look at differences in drawings. You have two drawings, you put them next to each other on the wall to compare them, and they look exactly the same. But if you look very carefully at the details, you see a few minuscule differences. So this gives you an idea how before Tango, she knows that there is something else. And then here indeed she comes to the realization that she has to give a name to this world where she is. In 1Q84, our mommy decided. Q1084. I shall call this new world like that. The Q is for question mark. And all walking, she nods. Even if I like it or not, I'm in the year 1Q84. The year 1984, as I know it, doesn't exist anymore. It's now 1Q84. The air is different. The landscape is different. The world has received a big question mark, and I have to quickly find a way to fit in. Like an animal that was let loose in a woods that it doesn't know, to protect myself and to stay alive as long as possible. I have to understand the rules that are practiced here and behave myself in that way. So, okay, two books, quite mysterious. I must say, indeed, the fact of the parallel world, I like that quite a lot. It is so there are some somewhat science fiction-y elements linking the two worlds, which while I love good science fiction, I didn't like it too much here because the writing style is quite clean and I thought it was a bit pushing it to science fiction elements, but still, it is very, very readable. Other people may like it more, but so you have to be warned that there are some strange things happening next to the fact that there is a parallel world. Okay, I must also say, looking back, so the two books, they could have been a bit shorter. There is a bit of repetition there. I noticed that several times that I thought that this could have been a bit more concise, or it was said more or less similarly before. But still, it's very good. But at moments, it wasn't. I didn't have the drive of keeping on reading these two novels, these two volumes, as I had with these older books. Very readable, but. As I think instead of these two big books, I think it could have been, which is 1,000 pages in total, I think it could have been one book of 800 pages and a bit tighter. But okay, each to his own. Now then, the third book that will come out, I don't know when it comes out in America and England. I don't know if there is a date yet. Which this really concludes the storyline. So while the first two, you feel various mysteries interlocking and you get interesting information, and the ending, well, it's a bit open, the ending of the first two, which to me in itself, it was not a big deal that it was an open ending. I don't mind that so much. So I think it's a bit on public pressure, popular demand that he wrote a closing volume, and you feel really here that the story, the spiral, really is not extending anymore, but converging to a real end of the story. Now it's a bit different in structure, the third book, and in fact. You see, there are in fact three main characters here. You have again Aomame and Tengo, and there is also Ushikawa, who is a private detective, and he's a fantastically interesting character. You get to know him in volume 2. He briefly comes there, and he's not exactly sympathetic, but when you read the story and you read and you learn about his memories, he's quite a sad person, and that's what he makes him so interesting. But my two favorite characters of the whole trilogy are Aomame, and this Ushikawa guy, the detective, which didn't always make a good decision in life, let's put it that way, and who is not exactly blessed with the good looks. Tengo, on the other hand, is such an honest, straightforward guy that, well, he's a bit less interesting to read about. I mean, he's there, and Tengo is a very Murakami-like hero. In his Murakami's books, the heroes are often quite passive. They simply undergo what's happening, and which makes for quite amusing reading. Ushikawa and Aomama are definitely not like that. That is what is remarkable in the third book. I must say the third book is fantastic. It is really, really, because I like the first two books, but the conclusion is really awesome. It reads very quickly. It's intricate as before. Everything comes back. Yes, Janacek Sinfonietta is there again, also, etc. It's really strong. I have here one short part about Ushikawa that gives really an idea about his, I would say, wasted life a bit, or at least the wrong decisions. Again, I'm trying to simultaneously translate. Everything you do seems to be meaningless. He had played all the cards that he was given. It wasn't a great hand, but thanks to a lot of effort and hard work, he had succeeded in getting everything out of it that was in it. He had made his brains work on full power, you could say, and thanks to slyly bidding, he had a chance to win the big prize. And during a time, it even looked like he would get it and bring that home. But now he didn't have any card to play anymore. The lamp above the table was extinguished, and all the other players had gone home. So gives this comparison, you could say, really refers to his, when he looks back, his sad life. But still, he's interesting. He's an interesting character, and you will love reading about him. So, what else about the three books? It's also about, so yes, the process of creation is there, about writing books is very important because it's integral to the different plot lines. There is also the whole subtext about freedom. You could have free will. There is what seems only like a small detail in the beginning about a cult somewhere in Japan will become very important. There are unpleasant things like rape comes in the book, but in a way that it's always quite special, the things that happen. Even a guy who, by all reasonable standard, is an extremely bad person, thanks to his writing, and when becomes an interesting person. Well, not a likable person, but you get to understand more, or even about the bad people. That is quite remarkable. So, if you have not yet read Murakami, well, come September, you can read this in English, or if you know Dutch, you can read them now. I think they are. I think if you are into Murakami, you have to read them. Obviously, you have to. If this is your first encounter of the writer, I would recommend try The Wild Sheep Chase or Kafka on the Shore. But it's a worthy novel of the, let's say, later phase in his career. He's early in the early 60s now, the author, and I'm really curious what he will do now. I'm not certain if it will be again such a big opus of around 1700 pages. Or 1600 pages, I believe, depending on the font and how it will be reprinted. So, as I mentioned, first two volumes, very good, interesting. Could be a bit shorter to my taste, but fascinating. The third volume is totally excellent. So, I hope you found this interesting and not too long. And as usual, feel free to leave feedback.